Nantes is situated on France's Atlantic coast, straddling the Loire River, and sits about 30 miles inland from the sea. The city's history spans nearly 2,000 years, with remnants of Roman settlements still visible today, including parts of the original city wall, which have been integrated into the castle and the cathedral. To understand why Nantes identifies more with Brittany than its current administrative region, you need to dig into both the Roman history of Gaul and modern French administrative structure. It's a little complicated, but stick with me here. During the Roman era, the Loire River served as a natural boundary separating the vast province of Aquitania, highlighted in red on this old map, from Armorica, which lies directly to the north and corresponds more or less with present-day Brittany. The Roman city of Portus Nomentum was mostly located on the north side of the river. Although Nantes was a significant city in Roman Gaul, it never held the title of capital for any province. People, of course, lived on both sides of the river and shared the same language and culture. I've marked the present location of Nantes with a blue arrow on this map. In ancient times, Nantes was known as Portus Nomentum and served as an important trading center here in Roman Gaul. The name you see on the map, Vicus Portensis, just meant it was a village or a settlement with a port. The city is strategically located where the Loire and the Erdre rivers join, which you can see on the map of the city. Rome did not conquer, settle, and build infrastructure out of the goodness of its heart. The Romans invested in infrastructure along the river, including roads, bridges, and ports. This development not only improved trade and communication, but also helped integrate the region into the broader Roman Empire. They expected to be repaid with interest for those investments. The river made a convenient geographic dividing line between the provinces, but it did much more. First, and this always came first, the Loire River Valley provided a strategic route for the movement of Roman legions and military supplies. Control of the river allowed the Romans to maintain a military presence and respond quickly to threats in the region, especially during the conquest of Gaul under Julius Caesar. Roman settlements grew up along the river, at first perhaps just local citizens who wanted to trade with the soldiers stationed in individual forts or strongholds. As those settlements grew, they gradually became Roman centers of culture, law, and governance, influencing the local population. They developed along quite predictable lines, beginning with two main streets intersecting in a large square where they located their forum, with sturdy buildings housing law courts, temples, and markets. Those law courts were called basilicas, and they were often the strongest and sturdiest building in town, so many of them were later converted into a church or a cathedral. Over time, walls were added, and with more streets, temples, and provisions for fresh water and sanitation as well. As needed, the walls could and were expanded, as you can see on this map. Nothing lasts forever, although the Roman Empire did have a fairly long run. By the 5th and 6th centuries, after the fall of the empire, waves of Celtic migrants from what is now Wales and Cornwall began settling toward the north in Armorica. These migrants called themselves Bretons, and they brought their language, culture, and tradition to the region, and naturally spread across the river into Nantes and to the south, much like the Roman settlers had done centuries earlier. Over time, the region became increasingly associated with the Breton, and the French term Bretagne reflects that connection. By the early Middle Ages, the name Brittany had begun to emerge, distinguishing this area from the rest of Gaul. Over time, Brittany evolved into a separate duchy. When the Romans withdrew and their organizational structure crumbled, local warlords filled the power vacuum. Around 845 in the Christian era, a local leader named Namanoye, shown here on the left, declared himself rather grandly to be the Duke of Brittany, marking the establishment of the Duchy of Brittany as an independent state. We don't know very much about him, except that he vowed in this woodcut that he would never wash his hands until he had driven some invaders, in this case the Franks, who were in turn the ancestors of the later Capets, whose line eventually evolved into the Valois family that would absorb Brittany into France out of his duchy. The later dukes came from a different family, the Montforts, but like Namanoy, they were determined to hold on to their independence from the Frankish kings and the ones who followed, including the French crown. The last independent duke was Francois II, shown the effigy on his tomb, and the last duchess was his older daughter, Anne, shown here at the right, glancing backward toward her chateau, somewhat wistfully, in my opinion, as she was hustled off to Paris to become the wife of a Valois and queen. Francois had no sons, and he was considering marrying off his daughters to the enemies of France, specifically a Habsburg, at the time of his death. The principle seemed to be anybody but a Frenchman. Brittany managed to maintain a degree of autonomy even after his death and into the late 15th century, when it was formally united with France in 1532 through the Edict of the Union, which acknowledged the duchy's privileges and rights, at least on paper. This cannot have been an easy decision for Anne to make, but I think she did what she thought was best for the independence of her duchy. You can learn a great deal more about Anne and her family in my Makers of History video blog. The link is in the description box below. Nantes' location has never changed, although various governments have redrawn that location on maps to the displeasure of the local citizens, many of whom consider themselves to be forever Breton. Today, Nantes, since where it has always been, straddling the Loire River valley, as a kind of gateway to the valley and the chateaus beyond. It's the administrative capital of a département, which is one of the subdivisions of a larger regional structure. The cultural disagreement surrounding Nantes' location on a map dates back to the French Revolution. While Nantes and its département consider themselves historically part of Brittany, the rest of France has disagreed ever since that time. In 1790, the old provinces were abolished. The new administrative structure shown on the map here was designed to, and I quote, enhance administrative efficiency, end quote. That tagline has been used by every government ever since for every kind of reorganization it's tried. Unfortunately, the local people rarely see much benefit from these changes. In this case, however, the national government may have had a good point. The previous feudal provinces were cumbersome and inefficient, so the new department system was meant to streamline governance by replacing them with something more manageable. The citizens were told establishing these departments would promote uniformity and equality, including an investment across the entire nation. The reform was supposed to ensure that all citizens were subject to the same laws and regulations, regardless of their location, and to foster a sense of national unity. That certainly sounded good, but the system centralized authority in Paris, something which the Bretons had long tried to avoid, with a nod toward a degree of local governments, but not enough. Under Napoleon, the system was solidified as part of his broader vision for a strong centralized state, just as had the Valois king of France, capable of efficiently managing both France and the territories he conquered. I imagine considerable local grumbling ensued, and it has persisted ever since. In 1955-56, a post-war decree established the Pays de Loire region, incorporating what had been Loire Inférieure along with Maine-et-Loire, Mauvergne, Sarthe, and Vendée. I'm not sure how much early post-war Bretons, who were still strongly identifying with their heritage, were in a position to squawk and voice their concerns. The arrangements were further solidified by some decentralization reforms, again to quote, increase administrative efficiency, end quote, in 1982 and 83, which created elected regional councils and affirmed the Loire Atlantic's place in the Pays de Loire. The trouble was that the other four Breton departments formed the modern Brittany. Today, local campaigns continue in Nantes and around to advocate for reunification with Brittany, which is where they think they belong. No matter where the national government draws administrative lines on a map, the French have learned that they don't have to endure it for long if they don't like it. Will some future government decide that Nantes belongs with Brittany? Would it make any practical difference? Nantes is an economic powerhouse in this part of France and somewhat independent of the tourist and economic drivers that characterize the rest of the chateau-dominated valley. So it could move, and I don't think would feel any loss. However, I'm not a Breton, so I can't say for certain. I don't think they can either. Whether the map says Brittany or Pays de Loire, run away with me next time to explore what the city of Nantes has on offer.